In the year 306 BC, a woman in the state of Qin did something that had never been done before in Chinese history. She gave herself a title. The title was Taihou, Empress Dowager. It did not exist before her. There was no word for it, no precedent for it, no ritual or ceremony that could legitimize it. She simply invented it, and then she claimed it, and then she ruled under it for 41 years. Her name was Mi Bazi. History knows her as Queen Dowager Xuan. She was the first woman in Chinese history to govern as a regent. She was the first to hold the title of Empress Dowager. She was the first to demonstrate that power in ancient China did not require legitimacy. It required only the will to seize it and the skill to keep it. And she did something else that history has never forgotten. She seduced an enemy king. She bore his children. She kept him as her lover for 30 years. And then she killed him and destroyed his kingdom, and eliminated the greatest threat her state had ever faced. This is the story of the woman who invented the rules of power, and then broke every one of them. She was born a princess of Chu, one of the most powerful states in the Warring States period. We do not know her exact birth year. We do not know her childhood. We do not even know her real name. Mi Bazi simply means Lady Mi of the 8th rank, a generic title for a concubine. What we know is this. She was sent to the state of Qin as a consort for King Huiwen, and she was not the primary wife. She was a secondary consort, a woman of lower rank. In the rigid hierarchy of the royal harem, she should have spent her life in obscurity, bearing children who would never inherit, watching from the margins as other women's sons became kings. But something about her was different. The historical records describe her as bold, unconventional, willing to say things that other women would not say. When she spoke, people listened not because of her rank but because of her mind. She understood the politics of the Qin court better than most of the ministers. She understood that power in the Warring States period was not about bloodline alone. It was about alliance strategy and the willingness to do what others would not. In 311 BC, King Huiwen died. The throne passed to his son by the primary wife, a young man known to history as King Wu. And Mi Bazi, the secondary consort, should have faded into irrelevance. But King Wu did something spectacularly stupid. He loved strength. He loved feats of physical prowess. And in 307 BC, he decided to prove his power by lifting a bronze tripod, a massive ritual vessel weighing hundreds of pounds, during a visit to the Zhou capital. He lifted it, and then his legs gave out. The vessel crushed his kneecaps. He died that night. He had no sons. The succession was thrown into chaos. What followed was a 3-year civil war. King Wu had brothers. Many brothers by many different mothers. Each had supporters. Each had factions. The Qin court split into competing camps, each backing a different prince, each willing to fight to the death for the chance to place their candidate on the throne. Mi Bazi had a son. His name was Yingji. He was not the eldest. He was not the most obvious choice. He was, at the time, a hostage in the state of Yan, hundreds of miles from the capital. But Mi Bazi had something that the other candidates did not. She had a brother named Wei Ran. Wei Ran was a military commander with troops loyal to him personally. He was ruthless, ambitious, and utterly devoted to his sister. And when King Wu died, Mi Bazi sent word to him. This is our chance. The next 3 years were a bloodbath. Wei Ran marched his soldiers into the capital. He purged the rival factions. He executed the princes who stood in their way. He eliminated everyone who might challenge Mi Bazi's son. And in 306 BC, Yingji was enthroned as King Zhaoxiang of Qin. He was 19 years old, too young to rule alone according to the customs of the time. A regent would be needed. But there was a problem. The regent should have been a senior male relative, a respected minister, a guardian of the bloodline. Instead, Mi Bazi did something unprecedented. She declared herself the regent. She gave herself the title Taihou, Empress Dowager. There was no precedent for this. No woman had ever governed Qin. No woman had ever held the imperial seal. No woman had ever addressed ministers and generals as her subordinates. But she did it anyway. And no one stopped her. Why? Because her brother controlled the army. Because she had proven over 3 years of civil war that she was willing to do whatever was necessary. Because the ministers understood, with the clarity that comes from seeing their rivals executed, that opposition would be fatal. She had invented a new kind of power. Not inherited. Not elected. Seized. For the next 41 years she would be the real ruler of Qin. Her son the king would grow to adulthood. He would take a wife, father children, perform the rituals of kingship. But the decisions of state, the appointments, the military campaigns, the diplomatic alliances all flowed through his mother. She surrounded herself with loyalists. Her brother Wei Ran became the most powerful minister in the realm. Her other relatives filled key positions. She created a network of power that answered to her alone. And she governed well. Under her regency, Qin grew stronger. The state had already been rising for generations. The legalist reforms of Xiangyang had transformed it from a backward frontier kingdom into the most formidable military power in China. But Mi Bazi accelerated that rise. She managed the complex diplomacy of the warring states period with skill. She formed alliances when necessary, broke them when advantageous. She directed military campaigns that expanded Qin's territory. She consolidated control over newly conquered lands. But her greatest achievement, and her most controversial, was the destruction of Yizhu. The Yizhu were a nomadic people who lived on Qin's western frontier. For over 200 years, they had been a thorn in Qin's side. They raided border settlements. They disrupted supply lines. They forced Qin to maintain a permanent military presence in the west, draining resources that could have been used in the campaigns to unify China. Every Qin king had tried to deal with the Yizhu. Some had fought them. Some had paid them tribute. None had succeeded in eliminating the threat. Mi Bazi chose a different approach. The Yizhu king was a man in his prime, a warrior who had led his people in raids against Qin for decades. He was powerful, respected, and dangerous, but he was also a man. And Mi Bazi understood that men had weaknesses that armies could not exploit. She invited him to the Qin capital. She treated him with honor. And then, according to the historical records, she seduced him. What followed was one of the most audacious long-term strategies in Chinese history. She became his lover. She bore him 2 sons. She maintained the relationship for 30 years. The Yizhu king, believing himself to be the seducer rather than the seduced, grew complacent. He visited the Qin court regularly, trusting in the bond between them. He allowed his guard to drop. He stopped viewing Qin as an enemy. And all the while Mi Bazi was waiting. In 272 BC she made her move. She invited the Yizhu king to the Gongquan Palace, a retreat outside the capital. He came as he had come so many times before, expecting pleasure. Instead, he found death. The details are unclear. Some sources say she killed him herself. Others say her soldiers ambushed him. What is certain is this. The man who had threatened Qin for a generation died in her palace, by her design. And then Qin's armies marched. Without their king, the Yizhu collapsed. Qin annexed their territory, establishing 3 new commanderies: Longxi, Beidi, and Shang. The western frontier, which had required constant vigilance for 2 centuries, was secured in a single campaign. The historian Ma Feibai would later write, "The Empress Dowager sacrificed her body to destroy Yizhu. Her achievement rivals that of Zhang Yi and Sima Qiu in conquering Shu and Ba. She had used the oldest weapon available to a woman, and she had used it to conquer a kingdom, but power once seized must be defended." Mi Bazi had ruled for 4 decades. Her son, King Zhaoxiang, was now in his 50s. He had been a king on paper for his entire adult life, but he had never truly ruled. Every decision had passed through his mother. Every appointment had required her approval. He was a puppet and everyone knew it. And puppets eventually want to cut their strings. In 266 BC, a fan named Fan Sui arrived in Qin. He was a refugee from the state of Wei. A man with a talent for politics and a grudge against Mi Bazi's family. He saw what others had not. The king was tired of being a figurehead. Fan Sui gained an audience with King Zhaoxiang. He spoke words that no one else had dared to speak. He said, "Your mother and her relatives control everything. You are the king in name only. If you do not act, the throne will pass to your heirs with the same chains attached. Is this the legacy you want?" It was a dangerous thing to say. Mi Bazi had killed men for less. But Fan Sui had calculated correctly. The king did not have him executed. He listened. The next year, 265 BC, King Zhaoxiang moved. He stripped Wei Ran of his titles. He exiled Mi Bazi's relatives from the capital. He assumed personal control of the government for the first time in his life, at age 60, after 41 years as a puppet king. And Mi Bazi? She was allowed to live. She was too old to fight, too powerful to kill without consequences. The king stripped her of political authority but left her with her titles, her palaces, her wealth. She retired to a quiet corner of the court, the woman who had once decided the fate of kingdoms, now reduced to watching her son rule without her. She died that same year. She was approximately 79 years old. But her story does not end with her death. 41 years after she lost power, her great-great-grandson would accomplish what she had spent her life preparing for. He would conquer the remaining states, unify China, and declare himself the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. The empire she had helped build, the military machine she had strengthened, the western frontier she had secured, all of it became the foundation for the first unified Chinese state. And the title she had invented? Taihou, Empress Dowager? It would become one of the most powerful positions in Chinese history. For the next 2,000 years, women would use the precedent she had created to govern as regents, to influence politics from behind the throne, to shape the fate of dynasties. Every woman who ever ruled China as an Empress Dowager, from Lu Ji to Deng Sui to Cixi, followed a path that Mi Bazi had blazed. She had invented the title. She had demonstrated that a woman could hold it. She had shown that power was not about legitimacy, but about the will to seize it. So why is she not more famous? Why does Wu Zetian, who ruled centuries later, appear in every history book and documentary, while Mi Bazi remains relatively unknown? Part of the answer is the nature of the sources. The Warring States period is ancient, the records fragmentary. Much of what we know about her comes from brief mentions in the records of the Grand Historian and the Zizhi Tongjian, not the detailed chronicles that exist for later figures. But there is something else. Mi Bazi does not fit the conventional narrative of female power in China. She was not a virtuous regent who ruled temporarily for an infant son. She was not a tragic figure who fell victim to court intrigue. She was a woman who seized power, held it for 4 decades, used her body as a weapon, killed her lovers and ruled with an iron hand. She was, in other words, exactly what Confucian historians did not want to acknowledge. A woman who played the game of power by men's rules and won. The historians who recorded her life could not ignore her. Her achievements were too significant, her influence too profound. But they could marginalize her, describe her as morally questionable, emphasize her lovers and her cruelty while downplaying her political accomplishments. This is the fate of women who break the rules. They are remembered, but they are not celebrated. They become cautionary tales rather than role models. But here is the question that Mi Bazi's life forces us to ask. If a man had done what she did, if a man had seized power through a coup, ruled for 40 years, seduced an enemy queen to destroy her kingdom, would he be remembered as a villain? Or would he be remembered as a genius? Would he be called immoral? Or would he be called a statesman? Mi Bazi invented the title of Empress Dowager. She demonstrated that a woman could hold supreme power in ancient China. She eliminated the greatest threat to her state through a strategy no man could have executed. She laid the groundwork for the unification of China. And she did it all without asking permission. There is a quote attributed to her in the Zizhi Tongjian. She was negotiating with an ambassador from another state. The ambassador was pressing her for concessions, trying to use diplomatic language to trap her in a corner. And she responded with words that shocked everyone present. She said, "When I served my husband in bed, if he pressed me with his legs alone, I felt tired. But when he pressed me with his whole body, I did not feel the weight." The ambassador was stunned. The ministers were embarrassed. No one knew how to respond to a woman who spoke so openly about sex in a diplomatic negotiation. But Mi Bazi was making a point. She was saying, "I understand pressure. I understand weight. And I am not afraid of it." She was telling the ambassador, and everyone who would ever hear the story, that she was not a conventional woman, that she would not be bound by conventional rules, that she would say what needed to be said, do what needed to be done, and let history judge her as it would. History has judged her. But history has not forgotten her. And perhaps that is the only victory that matters.